It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Tia Graham. Now, video games today could be costing players a lot more than the game's original sticker price. They have mechanics in them that mimic gambling. It all surrounds in-game items called skins. And skins are used to customize characters or items. But it's rare skins, which are harder to obtain, that really draw players in. Games today like Counter-Strike, Roblox, and others encourage its users to pay real money for just a chance to acquire and trade these rare digital skins. It's risky, a game that encourages gamers of all ages to overspend and engage in behaviors that could lead to unhealthy habits down the road. Nick Dever is a digital producer at Barron's and has reported on gambling in video games. He joins me now to explain how these transactions work, how it's impacting players, and what's being done to get a handle on it all. Nick, welcome to the Metro.
Hi, Tia. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And I want to start by explaining how some of this all works. Counter-Strike is a popular video game that's known for having these gambling mechanics. Using this game as an example, can you explain what loot boxes are and how they work for those who may have no idea what we're talking about right now?
Absolutely. So loot boxes are in Counter-Strike, but they're also in many other games, as you mentioned. They're a very common feature. They give players a chance to unlock new items. That could be anything from a new weapon to use in the game, a new outfit for your character, or virtual coins that you can use to buy more loot boxes. So here's how they work. A player spends in-game currency, that can be coins that they've earned through playing the game, or they spend real US dollars to buy and open a loot box. Typically, when you open a loot box, you'll see a sort of slot machine animation of everything that you could win whirring across the screen until it slowly comes to a stop and lands on the item that you've won. In most games, there are varying levels of rarity in the items that can be unlocked or won in loot boxes. So a common item might be a red t-shirt for your character, while an ultra-rare item might be a glowing rainbow helmet that gives your character more health points or something like that. But the rarer an item is, the less likely you are to win it in a loot box.
So what's a common real-life comparison of loot boxes for those who are still maybe a little bit confused about what it is?
Absolutely. I would draw your attention to Labubus. When you buy a Labubu, which are these like fun teethy dolls that were popular maybe 3 months ago, I don't know if they still are, when you wait in line for hours for the opportunity to buy a Labubu, you don't know which one you're going to get. You get a blank block, you get a blank box, you open it up, and inside is the Labubu that you've won. That is basically what a loot box is, but on a screen.
And similar, once again, Pokemon card packs for those as well. I mean, it's so interesting. I had no idea that that's how Labubus worked. I just assumed that you just picked the one you wanted, but I didn't know it was something like that. That's interesting. Thank you once again for bringing that to our attention. But, you know, I listed Roblox in the beginning there as another popular game that contains loot boxes. I know my dollars have gone to them as well for my nephew who uses them. So how common loot boxes are in games, period? How common are they right now?
Yeah, I mean, it might be easier to answer, what games they can't be found in.
Oh.
They're in Roblox games, as you said, computer games like Counter-Strikes, console games, FIFA, NBA, 2K, Madden. They're everywhere. I play a game on my phone called Brawl Stars, and sometimes I win enough matches that I get a little loot box that gives me a random prize. And I'll be honest, there have been times where I'm playing the game late at night, and if I see, if I just win 3 more games, I'll get a loot box, and that'll give me the chance to win a new item. And I admit, sometimes I stay up later and play more rounds just to get there.
Yeah, that incentive there is there for you to just go and get it and grab it. I mean, when did you start to recognize that loot boxes specifically could be of concern for gamers?
Yeah, well, I had one of my best friends is a big player of this game called Counter-Strike, and he showed me that there are items in the games that are worth hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars, and there's an entire market built around them. But then he showed me the gambling websites, and people had found a way to use these items as wagers in specialized online casinos. So now we're like way past loot boxes, I'll just say. Now we're talking about gambling with the items that you find in the loot boxes. So it's almost like a second layer of gambling to the gambling. And that's just specific to Counter-Strike and games from this company called Valve. But, I mean, really, they're everywhere. And the fact is we're introducing them into more and more games. and younger people are playing the video games that they're found in. I mean, Roblox specifically, that's a game for children and young teens, and mostly children. And there are lots of loot boxes in them. You know, it's important to understand that they're a very effective monetization and engagement mechanism. You know, in the past, it used to be that you bought a video game and that was it. It was a one-time purchase and you had the entire game. You take your copy of Halo or Mario home with you and you've got the whole thing. Newer video games have prioritized making repeat customers out of their players, and loot boxes have proven to be a very efficient way to keep players spending. They've permeated video game culture so much that most players don't think twice when they see them.
And Nick, this is kind of similar. I play The Sims. I'm a simmer. And, they have also added in that extra layer now where you have to pay to get more things included within the game that you've already paid for. So that's something that I've also noticed. Like now, I've spent probably $200 on additional stuff for The Sims. And it's
that's the thing. It adds up. It's these little purchases. Oh, it's only $2 for me to open this. Why not? And then you're making 3 $2 purchases a day.
Yeah.
And then you're making $22 purchases a week, and then et cetera, et cetera. It snowballs. And that's the point. The games are designed this way. Everything that you're interacting with is optimized to take as much attention and money from you as it can.
Now, you talked about Roblox just a little bit there. Once again, we've seen that it is for kids and teens and young people mostly. Who is most vulnerable to engaging in this practice when we're talking about this? I mean, I know we talked about the young people, but let's talk about the parents. How can the parents get involved as well to know more?
Yeah, if you're a parent who would describe their kid as a gamer, your kid already knows what loot boxes are and has probably opened one. I mean, I feel like I can say that pretty blanket. Again, these are everywhere. So, I guess just make sure you're having conversations with your child about what video games they're playing, whether or not the money you're giving them for the game is being spent on loot boxes. If you're buying a Robux gift card for your nephew, there's a chance that that's being spent on a gambling-like mechanic. And so you have to understand that there are risks involved. Set spending limits, set time limits, be responsible, but also understand that the games we play and the apps on our phone are optimized, again, to get as much time as possible out of us. And sometimes no amount of personal responsibility can overcome the neurological strings that these games and apps are designed to pull on.
You're listening to The Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Tia Graham. My guest is Nick Dever. He is a social media editor at Barron's, a financial news publication. He recently reported on the way video games mimic gambling. Now, you brought it up just a little bit earlier, but Valve, as you laid out, generates a lot of revenue from loot boxes. But in your reporting, you also explained that the developer makes a lot of money from third-party websites. Why are third-party sites of a concern when we talk about gaming now?
Yeah, so this is pretty specific, again, to Counter-Strike and the games that Valve has. So we're going to get a little technical here, so just bear with me. These items that you can unlock in Counter-Strike, you can buy and sell the items from and to other players that play Counter-Strike. It's not only that you can get these items, these skins they're called, from loot boxes. It may be you spend $2.50 to open a loot box and suddenly you have a skin that's worth $300 and you can sell that on something called the Steam Community Marketplace for in-game currency that you can use to buy more loot boxes, right? So now we've assigned a monetary market value to these items that come from loot boxes. So once they have a monetary value, people realize, okay, how can we take these skins off of Counter-Strike and put them as wagers on specialized online casinos? And so basically the way it works is you have a skin that's worth $20, you upload that to the gambling site, you get $20 to spend on the gambling site, maybe you win $50, and you can cash out that $50 with a $50 skin. So that's fine, whatever. But what happens from there is because these skins can be used for gambling, that raises the price of the skin overall, just because it has an extra use case. It's not just for showing off. It can now be used to gamble with. So because the market value of these skins is rising because of the gambling sites, that raises the bottom line of Valve, who gets a cut of every sale that's made on the Steam Community Marketplace where these skins are sold.
So it's like trading stocks or the resale market or a rare pair of Jordans.
Exactly, but imagine you could put your NVIDIA shares on red, and if you win, now you have 20 NVIDIA shares, and you can sell them back. And also, NYSE gets a cut, every single time you do that. That's kind of what we're talking about.
Wow. And, it was at first when I was looking into this and really researching, it was very difficult to understand the value in something that you can't physically hold.
Yeah, exactly. I think just to help understand, basically, it's not just that these things are worth money. If you're a kid who sees that your friend has a cool item, you're going to want to maybe play more games with them because they're someone who has really cool items. Yeah. The coolest kids have the coolest skins. They have the cool stuff, and they can only get those skins through loot boxes. And so you're sitting there thinking, well, how can I up my own social currency? Maybe I can get cool skins in loot boxes. And, the social aspect of it, the social currency, that is much better understood by a teenage brain than money. You know what I mean?
Yes. And you're hitting on it right now, though, but there is an entire culture of streamers and influencers who make content about these loot boxes. And you described it just a little bit now, but talk about the overall culture of it because it is growing.
Yeah, absolutely. There are entire YouTube channels that are dedicated to just opening loot boxes in Counter-Strike. I mean, that's literally all that the channels are. It's kind of like, vicarious, I guess for a viewer, it's, a kind of a vicarious gambling situation. And these YouTubers are sponsored in some cases by these illegal websites to post videos of themselves gambling, and a good loot box opening video is one where they win over and over and over, right? And so you, as a viewer, you're watching that and you're thinking, wow, my favorite YouTuber, they're winning so much when they open loot boxes. I ought to try that. Let me see if I can win. And unfortunately, the odds that the streamer is playing with are sometimes falsely inflated to make it look like they're winning more than they actually should. And then, a hapless teenager goes on and tries their luck, and suddenly they're out of money.
And it seems like Valve and other developers that we're talking about right now, especially those third-party sites who are paying some of these folks to do this, why doesn't anyone get involved? What's happening with the regulations of it all?
Well, a lot of these websites are offshore. They're not registered in the United States. They're not regulated by the United States. They're incorporated in places like Cyprus or Belize, offshore companies. And a regulator that I talked to basically said that these things are like whack-a-mole. You hit one of these sites with a cease and desist, they'll just make another site the next day. There's actually an entire sub-industry of people that just build the skeletons for these gambling sites. They're called white label sites. So it's like white label drugs. It's like, here's all of the bones and all of the pieces that you need to run a gambling site. Now you just upload the images for what you can win, and you're off to the races. It's actually quite easy to launch an offshore illegal gambling site in the United States. And there's not a lot that regulators can do. Our gambling regulatory system is state by state, so it's not the federal government that regulates gambling, it's individual state regulators. And, a regulator in Washington state, they've only got so much money. They've only got so much staff and time. Are they going to go after these skin gambling sites, this thing that's related to a video game that they kind of can't really understand or relate to when they don't have the time or the budget or the staffing to do so? And if they do go after them, nothing really happens. They're probably going to pick a different fight.
And I do want to hit on the fact, you brought it up, but I do want to talk about it again. Teenagers, spending money and not understanding what's really happening when their money's disappearing in the way that it's disappearing. And should parents step in and stop giving the kids the allowance or where do you see some of these issues being addressed, especially when we talk about it on a personal level?
Yeah, so that's not for me to say,
okay.
But I'll just say that research has shown that the earlier in life someone is introduced to gambling, the more likely they are to develop a gambling problem later on. The pleasure center in the brain becomes associated with that action, that risk and reward. If you're a kid and your brain is still developing, loot boxes are priming your brain to associate that chance and risk with pleasure. And later in life, gambling is going to be activating that same neural pathway that's already been warmed up by loot boxes. So in other words, they're sort of a gateway drug to other kinds of gambling. And while loot boxes are kind of not considered gambling on a legal case, that's, again, like I said, more risky for kids because the outfit that your character is wearing or the rarity of your items are status symbols. Teammates are going to be more interested in playing with you because you have some super rare item that you won in a loot box. That kind of social currency is way more valuable to teenagers than money in some cases.
And Nick, before we do let you go, are there any examples of regulation anywhere that you've been able to uncover during your research?
Yeah, so generally, gambling regulation in the U.S. is about 15 years or so behind regulation in Europe, in the U.K. We're just way far behind because we only just really got warmed up legalizing it with online sports betting in 2018 and everything that we've seen since. There have been some regulation in Belgium, some other European countries, but, generally the American market is very, 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 very large. And that's where these loot box purveyors are making most of their money, is the American market where this thing is unregulated and uncontrolled and, kind of just free money. I mean, this is a great monetization mechanic. There's a reason that all of these video games have loot boxes. Yeah. It's because they make them a lot of money.
Nick Dever is the social media editor at Barron's, a financial news publication. He recently reported on the way video games mimic gambling. Nick, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to explain it, because it is a lot to explain, but we learned a lot today. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Coming up, if these video games are causing players to overspend, then why can't gamers just stop spending? We'll break down why these games are so tough to quit. This is The Metro. You all stay right there.